Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Goolsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science. Will, are you going to tell us how excited you are about this episode?
Extremely.
You usually do on every
It doesn't feel right if we don't, right?
Yeah, doesn't feel right. But I really am excited because we're getting to address a whole bunch of our listeners' comments and requests with this one. We have Luke Garver here today with us, and we're really excited to have you, Luke. And, I'm glad you took some time to do this. We appreciate that a lot, and I know a lot of our listeners do because we've gotten some pretty consistent feedback that we need to get up in your part of the country to talk about turkeys.
Yeah, I really appreciate being on. Honored to be asked. I kind of expected that eventually I might get the nod from you guys, but I didn't expect it to be. I thought there'd be a lot of other states before you hit Illinois, but I'm happy to be on.
Well, you made the mistake of replying to the email quickly.
Maybe you asked several others, and I'm just the dumb one that said yes.
Yeah, the other 17 or so have not responded.
Yeah.
We left that part out of the email, though. Details.
Oh, well, it doesn't hurt my pride too much.
No, we have been getting quite a few comments and requests to get up in the Midwest. Mm-hmm. And we talked about it a little bit before the show. One of the things, since we started talking about the cicadas, we knew that you were kind of in the range of it and, have kind of got your finger on the pulse. So that's the one topic I'd like to get to at some point in the episode. But, a lot of people have reached out since we started talking about some of those things that would really be relevant to the Midwest. And, of course, since we're both from the Deep South, we have some bias to the South, and we're trying to expand this to other parts of the world.
Yeah, any big turkey hunter's got a little bias for the Southeast, but yeah, I'm happy to bring a little Midwestern flair to it for sure.
Yeah,
so
there you go. Well, Will, I don't know if you have a place that you wanted to start, but I
guess we could just kind of start talking about long-term trends in the population.
That's kind of where I was going to go.
Yeah, sure. So, I guess start at the beginning. Our first wild turkey hunting season was back in 1970 in southern Illinois, and that's where the restoration effort really started. And it expanded drastically as the restoration effort went off, and that mirrors so many other states, like you guys know, and we saw harvest, breaking records every year and participation and everything. And we kind of plateaued there in the early 2000s with an earlier record harvest there in 2006 was about where we hit our peak. And if you're using harvest as a metric of population, it's one thing to look at, but we were also having great success and everything, which kind of lends itself to monitor a population is not just looking at harvest, but also permit sales and success and everything. But it kind of leveled out there in 2006. And then, we started seeing declines in harvest, at least, and around 2010, 2012, it picked back up, and then it's kind of done an oscillating thing since then, but a general trend downward, and we kind of hit the floor, it looked like, around 2021, 2022, where permit sales were going up, but harvest was going down, so success rates were really going down too, and that also mirrors what we were seeing with the brood survey. And we've conducted a brood survey like a lot of other states since I think 1979 was the first year we started doing it. And in those days, they were just doing it in the southern tier states where turkey populations were highest. But in those early years, they were seeing poults per hen of 6 in the first couple of years, and then it dropped down to 4, and it hung there for a little while. But we in those years that I just talked about, 21, 22, harvest dropping down, we also saw the brood survey, the poults per hen dropping as well. I should say it was 2 years prior. That's how a lot of states really see it. You see a drop in poults per hen, and it's 2 years later where you really see it reflected in the harvest as those the cohort of 2-year-old birds reach maturity. So, but the last couple seasons since then, in both reproduction and spring season, have reflected an upward trend. So we like to think we're kind of digging ourselves out of a hole and maybe settling into that oscillating pattern that you see a lot with other game birds.
Yeah. So Luke, I was going to ask you, what is the poult per hen roughly here in the last few years?
So 2019 was when we kind of that was our record low, and so in that year, in 2019 we're at 1.4. That was by far the lowest. In the early 2000s, up until the 20 teens or so, we were floating around between 2 and 2.5, and then 2019 hit a big dip with 1.4. The next year in 2020, about the same, and we've been kind of digging ourselves out of that hole with about 1.6, and then this year and last year we're above 2 poults per hen again. So
nice.
Showing to be
I feel like that's happened so many places in the past couple of years. It's uncanny.
Yeah.
Isn't it remarkable how consistent it is across such a large area?
Yeah.
Yep. And I just got home a few days ago from the Midwest Deer and Turkey Study Group and talking with other Midwestern turkey guys, and that's the same pattern. The data we do with the brood survey, we're actually calling it the wild turkey survey now, because we're asking folks to report observations of all birds. But those data get analyzed by members of the NWTF Technical Committee. Zach Danks from Kentucky and Mary Jo Castellana from Pennsylvania help organize that effort. And so I'm still looking at raw data and data that I'm just summarizing with Excel right now.
Sure.
And so they still need to be analyzed. But yeah, right now it's looked like it was a good year, but maybe a slight decline from last year, which is, like, as you mentioned, the cicada hatch was kind of a surprise. We didn't know what we would be getting ourselves into, especially after looking at Indiana a couple years ago, had a big cicada hatch, and they, I think, I don't remember if it was a year later or 2 years later, they had a record harvest after that, and saw their poult per hen ratio skyrocket. And we didn't see that this year, which was a little surprising. However, it was still a good year. So
yeah, the ones that I'm familiar with the cicada, they were the year of for the brood surveys that the perceived increase, and then 2 years later for the, I guess, reflecting the 2-year-old cohort from that.
We saw that to an extent. So that cicada hatch that Indiana experienced, there was a little bit of crossover into some of the far eastern Illinois counties, and those in the same year Indiana had a big harvest increase. Those counties also saw that as well. So it did affect a little bit. The thing I wonder this year, and this is speculative, but we in the years where we saw the brood survey tank, one of the potential causes that I've kind of thought was we had really wet springs that potentially was affecting nesting, and it's hard because you say wet spring, it wasn't necessarily wet spring statewide, and that's the only scale we can really look at these data with any power. So, but much of the state received a lot of rainfall during those critical times. And we saw that this year, this spring in 2024. And so one speculation I have is that maybe it would have been a really, really poor year if it weren't for cicadas helping out a little bit. That's a lot of speculation there, but.
Well, it's also interesting, food could be limiting until it isn't. Right. And if they're going to, if they are limited by some sort of environmental condition, you can give them all the food they want.
Yeah.
They're still limited by the environmental condition, and maybe you did see something like that. But that is interesting. That's the first account that I have heard of where there was a big cicada event, and the perception of the local biologists that that are like yourself keeping their finger on the pulse. I haven't heard anyone that didn't say that they saw a bump.
And so anecdotally, just hearing from people, I hear from everybody's got trail cameras or out and seeing turkeys. I get calls a lot, and I encourage it. I leave my email out there for folks to reach out and everything. I want to hear and see all the pictures. And a lot of people are anecdotally saying, man, more poults than I've ever seen and everything. But we were hearing that a lot last year too. So, and I can say, talk about food being limited. Bugs were not limiting this year with the cicadas. It was amazing. And we had two emergences, 2 broods. So there was a 17-year and a 13-year emergence, and so it covered the whole state. North to south. It was pretty cool. And then there's just the weird little pockets where there would be none. The county just north of me, virtually no cicadas at all. But you come 15 miles south, and it's about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it'd make your ears ring. It's so loud out there.
Yeah.
So
Well, maybe that's what it is. All the turkeys got killed because they can't hear anymore.
Yeah, it could be. I don't know. They're driven insane. A lot of us were talking about that. Like it was really cool when it first started emerging, and where everybody's like, "Oh, it has begun," and talking like that. And then as we're like well into the season, everybody's like, "Okay, the novelty has wore off. I'm done. I'm done with the stink. I'm done with the sound."
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see if next spring's harvest data is consistent with what you're seeing in the brood survey data, and that there's not really an effect. Or, it could be that maybe for some reason you just didn't pick it up in the brood survey this year, but you see it reflected in the harvest numbers.
Yeah. And
maybe it's later on in the year.
Yeah.
It could be that. Yeah, it's going to be real interesting. And another thing that kind of mirrors the brood survey and poults per hen is looking at the percentage of jakes in the harvest. That tends to be it almost seems like that's falling out a little bit, but you can still follow a general trend. I don't know. I wonder about hunter preferences changing and hunters trying to target more mature birds, but
I would expect that jake index to become less reliable over time.
Yeah, I was just, in preparation for this, I was just looking back at some of the older numbers, and there was, in 2005, for example, I think we harvested it was 36% of the harvest were jakes, and now we're usually fluctuating about 19 to 20%, and I think we're probably still in the high end if you compare us to a lot of other states.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's more than I would have expected.
Yeah, it is. It is on the high end compared to several other states that I'm familiar with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Don't put us down here in Illinois for being jake killers, but
hey, I'm not throwing any shade right now.
Yeah, I'm not.
But
either.
that tends to be around the number, but it'll fluctuate up to as high as 22, 23% in years following a big bump in the brood survey. So,
kind of backing up a little bit, Luke. I wanted to ask, and I don't know, what your history is in Illinois and how long you've been there, and if you're going to be, familiar with all of this, but just are you seeing any changes over that time period that, turkey vital rates have obviously changed, regarding the landscape? Like what are kind of the big picture changes that you're seeing in your state that might be playing into that?
Yeah, in terms of like landscape level change, like land cover and stuff, or
Yeah, I mean, like, what have been I guess over the past, 20 or so years,
yeah,
have there been any, significant changes that you think you would hypothesize would affect turkeys?
yeah, and in my opinion, that's one of the big holes in our knowledge, and something I would really like to look into. That we hinge on CRP for a lot
Sure.
of our brood and nesting cover, and just upland wildlife habitat in general. And
Right.
and that those data are really hard to get at. We get general numbers, but we don't have access to see where they're at and what the practices are a lot. So it's hard to monitor. I have taken some course looks at like the NASS data, especially in West Central Illinois. So West Central Illinois is one area where we have seen harvest totals like severely decline from what they were at their highest point. A lot of the state has kind of oscillated, and if they did see declines, they've come back up. West Central Illinois, in that Illinois and Mississippi River corridor, is an area that they used to be, the highest harvest counties. Some of them still are up there, but they're not as high as what they were. But looking at the landscape level changes, yeah, you definitely see the NASS data shows like decreases in grassland, increases in agriculture. So and we know that CRP as a grand scale is decreasing too. So but it's really a hole in our data or a hole in our knowledge as a statewide level, looking at the landscape level change. But I suspect that their turkeys are hinging on that brood rearing habitat, going away, and what's left is in the CP1 practice, where it's the introduced grasses, where it may be showing up as CRP, and coarsely folks might think it's very valuable habitat, when in fact you go look at it, it's all introduced grasses and doesn't provide much value at all.
So what's the most problematic species of invasive grass that y'all have to contend with?
Well, smooth brome is one, and I don't know, the bad part about that is it's planted intentionally in many cases. But smooth brome for the northern 2/3 of the state, and tall fescue in the southern third or so, and
those are the two I would have named.
Yeah,
yep, so we're familiar with those.
Right, and they tend to be the ones that are prevalent in a lot of areas. Of course, we have reed canary grass in your lower lying areas, and that one's it seems like smooth brome and tall fescue you can manage and try to get ahead of. Reed canary is that's one that's really tough to battle in Illinois. And then in terms of other herbaceous invasives, we've got the Sericea lespedeza has become more and more prevalent, and southern tip of Illinois, they've even got a lot of the species you guys deal with, like Japanese stiltgrass and things like that. So
yeah.
So Luke, it sounds like just based on your local knowledge and experience that turkey habitat has declined.
Yeah.
And probably become more fragmented. Is that?
Absolutely. And that's just the trend in a lot of the corn belt. As agriculture, the practices become. We're farming edge to edge. We're farming larger and larger parcels. Fence rows are being taken out. We see a lot of wooded draws, that being taken out and replaced with water and sediment control basins. That's a practice that a lot of people don't really think about, and they're just these tiny little draws that would have a lot of early successional trees or shrubs and even some grasses and forbs, and those are the habitats that upland birds, quail and pheasant and turkeys during parts of the year are really hanging on to, and they're a nuisance for farmers. So if they can take those out and farm across that. And what's tough is we're also balancing water quality. You know, in Illinois, our NRCS offices are facing a tough battle, trying to help farmers manage their land and recommend practices. On one hand, we're trying to improve water quality and reduce sedimentation and reduce nitrate runoff. We're also trying to improve wildlife habitat. And sometimes, most of the time, you know, you can do both, but sometimes it's tough to do both, and you gotta pick one or the other. So.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm hearing from you right now, Luke, is I need to be doing some more work on soil and water quality plantings that also have upland bird value.
That is, yes. That I spent some time working for NRCS, and that was always something I was trying to balance was, you know, how can we plant a native species beneficial to wildlife into this grassed waterway that is, you know, not intended from a practice standpoint, not intended to be wildlife habitat. It's intended to be an engineering practice that you know facilitates water running away without, you know, causing erosion. So yeah, it's a delicate dance.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that resonated with me while you're talking about the landscape changes is that it's often that, you know, Marcus and I will run into, you know, turkey enthusiasts, turkey hunters, and talk to them about, you know, habitat changes that have occurred that are negatively affecting turkey populations. And oftentimes, you know, you get a reply to the effect of, well, I hunt this place or this state or that state, and things haven't really changed there.
Yeah.
But you can see, like, really easily in your home state's example, that if you're just driving by, like maybe you go to Illinois every year to turkey hunt and you're just driving through these areas, you may not notice that the grass species have changed over, you know, from native species to smooth brome and tall fescue.
Mm-hmm.
Or you may not notice that, you know, some of those ditches have been converted, or you may not notice that they're farming edge to edge, or that, you know, that 30-foot buffer around the ag field has been taken out of, you know, habitat and put into production. Those are really nuanced changes that are hard for people that are uninformed, or really that don't spend their time there day in and day out to see. And some of them, you know, it can even happen right under their nose and not be that obvious.
Yeah, and that's something I try to talk to folks about a lot, is that, you know, if we're like, well, this block of woods that I've spent all my time in, it's been woods as long as I can remember, and so it's not always about the quantity of habitat being lost. It's about the quality of it. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention bush honeysuckle. That's probably in terms of you know, wooded wildlife habitat, and it's especially impacting wild turkeys. That's our public enemy number one, is a moor honeysuckle or bush honeysuckle, and it's extremely prevalent in all wooded acres, and becomes more and more prevalent every year. It's a really tough one to get a hold on. So it
sounds
leaks
like our
out
privet.
before almost it leaks out almost before almost any other native woody species, and it retains leaves longer. So, you know, just causing that shady area, and killing out all the native ground cover and everything. So that's when folks ask me about wooded habitat management, that's almost always where you have to start, is trying to get at least a foot in the door. You're never going to eradicate bush honeysuckle, but at least getting a foot in the door with that species and trying to knock it back so you can get any other work done. You know, it's tough to even run a fire anywhere near that stuff, because a lot of times you just have almost bare ground underneath it. So
yeah,
and the litter that it produces is not flammable.
Flammable. Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I made a comment while you were talking that sounds very similar to our privet problem.
Yeah,
in some places in the deep
southern
south.
tip of Illinois, they've got plenty of privet down there too.
Okay.
But we try to talk about the mesification of the Illinois woodlands. You know, just becoming more and more shade tolerant, and fewer oaks, and a lot more maples and beech, and a lot more invasive species. You know, the early accounts talked about how you could ride a covered wagon through the woods in Illinois. That's the spacing that we're looking for in a lot of cases with these oak savannas. So
right.
Well, I think as a point of emphasis to our audience, like those woods may not look much different, but that process of becoming more shaded and moister and those species invading equal declining quality for turkeys.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And it may not look like that to the untrained eye, but that is a very real concern. Even though it's still woods, the quality of those woods has declined as a result of those changes.
Yeah. Yeah, when you hit a bush honeysuckle wall, you can pretty much, give up on turkey hunting that area. It's best to just avoid it at all costs because that's what the birds are doing.
As much as it pains me to shift away from the topic of habitat, I did want to also ask, kind of over that period that you described a little while ago, it sounded like it started about 20 years ago. Y'all had your peak, and now it's oscillated some with like this long-term slight decline. Have y'all made any regulation changes in response to that over that time period?
Yeah, not a ton. We've been operating this this season structure that we currently have since 2002, I think, is how long we've been operating a 5-segmented season. And before that, it was a 4-segmented season. So Illinois is one of these states that's always had a segmented season. When you buy a permit, it's good for a particular season segment. But other than that, it's really the big regulation changes have been just opening new counties. They were very selective in Illinois when they first started the turkey season on which counties would be open. And, if you look at some of our older documents, they talk about like Eastern Illinois being non-turkey range. There'll never be birds there, so we'll never have a season there. And now we're open for the spring season in every county except Cook and DuPage, which are Chicago. So,
Gotcha.
Luke, along those same lines, I am really curious about the season framework and what it looks like because I'm not very familiar with it.
Yeah.
But one question about that: what about do you have a fall season?
We do. Yep. We actually have 2 fall seasons. So one of them is October 2nd as we record this. So the fall archery season opened yesterday, October 1st, and it coincides with the deer archery season. So same dates.
So a lot of people probably incidental.
Yeah. Just opportunistic. Yep. Absolutely. And we've got, I want to say there's roughly 20,000 or so participants in that season that don't hunt the spring season. So yeah,
interesting.
So they're deer hunters who have a turkey permit in their pocket. It's relatively inexpensive, so it's a good one to have. And I think it's kind of it's still we only report harvest of about 1,000 birds every year for that fall archery season. Actually, closer to about 800. So not a
really
big
low.
Yeah, real low, and it's open statewide, all 102 counties in Illinois. So we did see a little bump in it when we made crossbows legal for all archery season. And so we don't have data going back to those first couple seasons, but the last couple of seasons I've been able to ask the question, which archery equipment are you using, traditional compound or crossbow? And we're seeing about 65% of birds are harvested with crossbows.
And is that an either sex season?
It is. Yep. Yeah. It's and that's written in statute right now. So in the fall archery and fall gun season, you can harvest two birds of either sex. Archery permits are available over the counter, and in the fall gun season they're limited by quota, but that fall gun season is even more. It sees even less participation in the fall archery season. So we only see about 270 birds being harvested in that fall gun season. It's only open in half the counties. So Western Illinois and Southern Illinois, where we have larger turkey populations, and it's a 10-day season that runs at the end of October. And I think, it was probably about 10 years ago where we saw more birds being harvested in the archery season than the fall gun season, and it's continued to separate itself. Just a lot more people participating in fall archery than over the fall gun, and then way more people participating in the spring season over any fall turkey hunting at all. So both those seasons combined, we only see about 1,000 birds harvested statewide.
Okay. So Luke, are hens allowed in the spring season, like a bearded hen?
Just bearded hens, and they usually only make up about 1% of the harvest. So
1%.
Yeah, so pretty low.
So how many birds are being harvested in the spring? You said the 1,000 in the fall.
Yeah. Well, this spring we just set a record for harvest, and it was 17,208. It's the first time we've topped that 17,000 number for spring season. So, the last 5 years have averaged probably about 15,000, and then this year was a huge bump. And the previous record was in 2006 with a little over 16,000 birds. So we beat the previous harvest by over 800 birds. So pretty good bump.
Wow. And have you been able to keep up with the? I know you were talking some about the permit sales and how that had changed over time. Are y'all able to do any kind of catch per unit effort calculation into your harvest? It would be rare if you could, because most states, that's very difficult.
Right. So we keep track of number of permits sold. I'm able to. So we sold more permits than we ever have this year too, 86,000 or so, and then I'm able to also see how many unique individual hunters we have, and that number is close to a record. We've got about 64,000 participants in the spring season. As far as catch per unit effort, we don't do an after season survey, which would be really helpful, but we do ask how many days folks spent hunting when they are successful, but that's just successful. The valuable thing would be to know their effort, to know the unsuccessful hunters' effort as well. But I think we asked that in a 2019 hunter satisfaction survey, and then we asked it in a previous survey that was like 10 years before that. So we don't have annual data on that. We see in the spring season, takes about two days to kill a bird is what the average is, and it is, whether it's a good season or not, that's
impressive.
It's two days per bird. It takes me a lot more than that usually, but
okay, now I feel better.
Will was like doing the math real quick.
Yeah,
I don't need to do the math. I know it's more than that for me.
It blows my mind how steady that is.
Well, I heard that statistic, and I was already Googling job openings, Illinois. I need all the help I can get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, some years are way worse than others, but yeah. Last year I hunted my butt off all season and finally got a bird the very last day that I could possibly get one, almost to the last hour. So
makes for a good story.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Dedication. Perseverance.
There's something about that last day, last hour. I don't know what it is.
Yeah. I wouldn't trade it for anything. The way it all went down, it makes it, I got a lot of quality hunting in, we'll just say that.
There you go.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it.
But yeah, I guess, we can talk a little bit about the season structure. I know it's an involved season structure. Some folks call it confusing or complicated, but we're like a lot of other Midwestern states in that we have a segmented season. So total in all, it's a 32-day season, and it's broken down into 5 season segments. And the earlier season segments are longer than the later ones. So the first season segment is 5 days, and it's just a Monday through Friday. And then second season segment is second and third are 6 days, and fourth is 7 days, and the fifth season is 8 days long.
So what is the intent of having the segmentation? Is it to try to distribute out harvest pressure or hunting pressure?
Yeah, okay. I think that was the original design. I'd love to find some notes where they were deliberating over coming up with this. I've never been able to find anything. But yeah, I think the big thing is to to distribute harvest pressure, to distribute hunter density. You know, our state's 97% private land, so both turkeys and land to hunt them on are pretty finite resources. So I think that's a lot. That's a lot behind the idea of that, is to try to improve the quality of the hunt, make it a safer hunt, and then also kind of preserve the natural resource a little bit and distribute that that harvest over the 32-day period. And then we have zones as well. So the South Zone opens the first Monday after April 2nd, and the North Zone opens a week later than that. So our zones are offset too.
Okay.
And then you're able to purchase up to 3 permits per hunter, subject to availability. So a lot of folks talk about Illinois got a 3-bird bag, and I guess technically we do, but in my mind, the bag is 1 bird per permit, and you can purchase up to 3. And we see, I think it's 75% of our hunters only purchase 1 permit.
Okay.
Okay.
And how is harvest actually distributed throughout those different segments?
You keep cutting me off, Will.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I got to be fast.
It's very heavily up front. So those first 2, gosh, I want to say, should have probably crunched this. I think it's 50% of the birds are harvested in the first 2 season segments, with the first season segment having the bulk of that, and then it's distributed on after that. And
so that's basically like the first half of April, where the majority of the birds are harvested.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. When does that first season segment open?
First Monday after April 2nd in the South Zone, and then a week later in the North Zone. So it's a rolling. The season start date changes year to year. So last year it was the earliest it could be by calendar date, and this year it was the latest. So every 6 years or so we see that big shift, and that's when I get a bunch of calls. Why'd you guys push the season back a week later? And like, well, I didn't. It's a rule of thumb, and the calendar did that. I didn't do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you wonder, like with our record harvest, how much those pulses in harvest are determined by start date. I've been trying to kind of correlate that. Never really.
That's interesting.
I haven't been able to really. There's just so many confounding factors. So somebody a lot smarter than me would need to run some stats on that and include weather and rainfall and another factor in terms of hunter effort in Western Illinois is we had black flies. We call them buffalo gnats, and so I think that really, as good as this season was, I think it could have been higher if we had an earlier start date, because in the range of black flies, which is Western Illinois, it put a lot of those hunters out there peak black fly season in about halfway into the season.
Wow.
And it's unbearable to be outside. You got to have a mosquito net or just be done by 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, or you'll get eaten alive.
So how do they affect turkeys? Do they at all? I mean, are they just pestering them all the time out there?
When I first started, that was probably one of the biggest questions. You guys need to research these black flies. They're killing all the birds, and and it wasn't long after that we were starting to see declines in population, particularly declines in harvest, particularly in West Central Illinois, and everybody was. Not everybody, but a lot of folks are pointing fingers at black flies, and we know they killed domestic poultry, but they haven't been studied very much. So I think there was a study in, I can't remember if it was the upper Midwest or Canada, where they found they were actually killing owlets on the nest. But when you look at the timing, typically the big pulse of black flies are over and done with by the time turkeys are hatching. And so the theory behind that some folks had was that they're disturbing hens on the nest and either causing them to be overly active, which would attract predators, or causing them to leave the nest altogether. And so we had a project going at the time, and we asked if they could try to get at that question. So we actually had a graduate student, and that was the focus of her thesis, was to look at the effects of black flies on nest success, and she found that basically no effect. She had dry ice black fly traps that would attract these black flies, and she could really monitor the pulse of the emergence and how long they were out, and put them not right next to nest, to risk disturbance, but in the vicinity of nests. And then so she did that in West Central Illinois, where black flies are very prominent, and then did it again in Southern and Eastern Illinois, where we virtually have none, and basically found that turkeys are very unsuccessful in both areas. And and that was the crutch of it, is black flies, if they're having an impact, it's not a bigger impact than any of the other factors that are driving down success. So.
Yeah. Well, that is really interesting. Do the black flies, and I did not expect us to be talking about flies this much today, but here we are. Do the black flies tend to prefer like certain vegetation types over others?
It seems like, when they're the worst, they're just everywhere. If you're outside in the woods or near the woods, they are everywhere, but they're thickest in open areas. And so it seems like, anecdotally, and just myself being a turkey hunter and talking to other turkey hunters, it seems like when they're bad in the later part of the turkey season in those years, birds are spending all their time in the woods where there are slightly fewer, and turkeys are a lot less vocal.
Yeah.
But yeah,
so it could just be
I've been sitting out there.
Thing.
I've been sitting, on the edge of fields before, with my nice little mosquito net over my head and watching birds just literally run around in circles trying to avoid these things. You definitely feel sorry for them.
Well, the reason I asked that is because with some of my lab's recent disease data, we've seen some associations with different forest types, is particularly for LPDV.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't really have a way to explain that yet. We're not the first people to find it ever. Others have as well, and we think that it may have something to do with a biting insect.
Yeah.
Habitat preference, if you will.
Yep.
But it's just, I don't know. It's all early on and very speculative at this point.
Yep, and that question has popped in my mind too. And the PI on the project, Dr. Jeff Hoover, had some forethought and actually froze all those black flies. So we have them available, but to my knowledge, nobody's looked at analyzing them to see if there's any presence of LPDV or any other, diseases that may affect birds. But that's definitely on the horizon. I'd love to have somebody look at that. Not something I definitely have any expertise in, but yet we have those bugs available to us for a future project.
We're doing something kind of similar to that right now with mosquitoes, where we're looking at, I am not doing it. A partnering lab is leading the work. I'm just involved in it, but looking at blood meal and mosquitoes, and we can do a number of things with that I did not realize. But very interesting. I like to throw a wrench into things whenever I get a chance, and you're talking about how much it affects the turkey's behavior, and obviously the pestering could really negatively affect her and the poults for sure directly. But when you talked about it making her restless and attracting predators, you guys probably experience this. I hear this from people all the time where they only think about the prey species. That could just as easily be pestering all of the predators,
right,
and releasing her from predation, because they don't want to run around with a bunch of black flies in their eyes and nose and everywhere else either.
Everybody, turkey hunters included. I think we saw, and you can track it in a lot of the harvest data. As soon as I got a little notes page on my phone where I keep track of little things like that, and I noted black flies, very prevalent today, were not present yesterday. And if you look at the harvest across those counties in Illinois at that time, that's when it shut off. And I always like to project a map of like county harvest. That's the finest scale where we collect harvest data is by county. And so I have those data and can compare it to previous years. In many of the black fly prominent counties, we actually saw harvest decline from last year. So almost every county statewide, was way ahead of last year. And then in counties where the black flies are really bad, we actually saw a slight decline in those counties. So pretty interesting how it affects hunter effort.
Yeah. Well, so, it's at least affecting us as a predator.
Yeah.
So that's
right.
interesting. But you'll have to forgive my ignorance about black flies because I just don't know that much about them. Are their populations cycling with the environmental conditions? Like in the wetter years, are they more?
That remains a bit of an unknown. They're just not. They haven't been studied at all. So the grad students at the time that were looking into it, they were having trouble finding a lot of background information. I remember them finding some like early pioneer correspondence in where folks were talking about livestock being lost to black flies. They're wondering how many head of cattle, how many horses did you lose to black flies. But if you talk to folks a generation older than me, who grew up in the outdoors and grew up hunting, they'll tell you black flies weren't around at all. And so they require good water quality and running clear water to reproduce. So there's been some speculation that as we've decreased sedimentation and runoff and possibly improved water quality in some of these areas that they've rebounded. I don't know if they've rebounded above or at the levels that they were historically, but yeah, that's another big hole in the knowledge. We don't know much about these things.
Really interesting.
Yeah, it is.
I don't even know what to make of it.
Yeah.
I haven't thought about
I was expecting
flies.
I was expecting it to be something like, negative about, the ecosystem that had changed over time that may have benefited their populations. And you brought up something positive, and now I'm just like at a loss. So.
I know. That's what that people joke, well, we just need to go back to muddying up the waters again. That seems to be the solution.
Well, that's another problem is that's not the only thing that's changed, like we've talked about. It could be decreases in, certain pesticides or something.
Sure. It could be, more phosphorus in the water too. It could be a decline in quality in terms of that. So. Or
declines in competing or predatory insects.
Well, that's what I was thinking about. Like maybe, pesticides are targeting certain species that keep black fly populations down for whatever reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yet another hole in our knowledge, I seem to have brought those up a lot today.
That's good. That's what we like.
Yeah. It gets our noggin rolling.
That's right.
Well, I went blank on what I had another question for you that we kind of got sidetracked on the black flies, and now I forgot what it was. Will, you got something?
I'm taking notes on all the research ideas Luke's giving me over here.
There you go.
Yeah, we talked about the season structure. That was something I definitely was interested in. Whether that had changed over time. Did I jog your memory, Marcus?
Yeah, I actually just thought of what I was going to ask.
Cool.
And Luke, you feel free to decline if you don't want to step into this hornet's nest. But what about data on predators of turkeys? Do you guys have any kind of data on how that's changed? Because you know if in this community that there's a bunch of people screaming at us right now on the screen saying, "What about predators?"
I know. I get it a lot. So we do run a spotlight survey. That's one of our best ways. One of our only ways really of monitoring a lot of those species, and that has shown a drastic increase in raccoons, and possums and skunks. The the species that are often blamed as nest predators. We also know that we've had a substantial increase in bobcat population in Illinois. So historically, we had virtually no bobcats, and now we've got a season that covers most of the state that it's only been around less than a decade. So that's the one I hear about a lot. It's the bobcats killing all the turkeys, and I'm sure they take their share. But we're honestly not sure how much impact they're having. That's not something Illinois has studied. Is the direct impact of any of these predators on turkeys. I shouldn't say it hasn't been studied at all. There is a project that was done. I want to say 10 or 15 years ago on one site in southern Illinois, and so they went out and they put radio telemetry backpacks on a bunch of hens, and they also caught several bobcats and several coyotes, and they found where these hen home ranges and coyote home ranges overlapped. They actually had higher nest success. And then in areas where hens and bobcat home ranges overlapped, there was no effect on nest success. And so, it was just a couple nesting seasons on one site, but it's the only study we've done as a state on the topic. And so one thing, you wonder about especially with the coyote information there is, were coyotes suppressing those mesocarnivores and nest predators where those home ranges overlapped?
Yeah, we did an episode that touched on some of that, where there is some evidence from elsewhere that might occur. Right. What's funny about this is I assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, Luke, but y'all have had coyotes for a long time in Illinois.
Yeah,
much longer than we have here in most of the Deep South. And it's just, I don't know, just as a side note, it's interesting how everybody always wants to blame the novel predator. So like here, I feel like a lot of hate goes towards coyotes, and you're saying there, like when bobcats, kind of came back on the scene, everybody wanted to blame the bobcats. It's just a funny observation of human nature,
Yeah, wherever the novel species is. I do some grouse hunting in Wisconsin. You go to northern Wisconsin, and they're blaming turkeys as the killers of all the grouse. So, because in those upper Northwoods counties, turkeys are pretty new, and they've seen some grouse decline. So obviously, it was the turkeys killing them all.
Isn't that something?
Yeah. Well, I can go help them with that problem.
All these definitive relationships from all over the place.
Well, I think it's human nature.
Yeah.
We look for patterns, and we look for inconsistencies and things like that. So.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I cut you off earlier, but I did want to bring up the predator thing because I knew that would be a hot topic that people want to know about.
It's definitely a hot topic, and I've been discussing. I've turned our his wildlife diversity program manager, but he's in charge of the fur bearers and trapping programs, and I've turned him onto your guys' podcast and said, listen to these episodes in particular, the ones where you guys are going to those deep dives, and now he's like, well, we need a project, Luke. We need to have the biggest and best predator research project that's ever been done in Illinois. I'm like, well, let's do it.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Good. I'm definitely going to stay tuned for that.
Yeah. Well, I hope we are inspiring work like that. That's great to hear.
I'd say you guys definitely are.
Well, it's good to hear. I'm glad you guys are, thinking about, different things that you need, like different data that you need to, to understand what's the status is and what you should do.
Absolutely.
Forward. So that's great. So, Luke, did you have something, Will?
I had something related to habitat that we talked about earlier that I wanted to get back to eventually, but I knew that we needed to talk about, bigger picture reg and population stuff before we probably got into that level of detail. So I can hold that.
Well, I was just going to ask, since we kind of started talking a little bit about research. I know, Luke, you said that you had some things on the horizon, and I was just curious if you could share any information about what you guys are planning.
Yeah. Well, it's very, very early in the planning process. Like, haven't even wrote a proposal yet, but we're hoping to kick off a gobbling chronology study next year, and we also plan to have a capture component where we're capturing hens and putting some GPS transmitters on them as well. So a lot of that. A lot of the questions we're going to be hoping to address for that will be the season structure thing. You know, are we timing our season correctly? Is it necessary to have a north and south zone with a week offset? One of the positive things I hear a lot about our segmented season is it keeps birds gobbling longer through the season. Whereas, you know, I go hunting in Missouri and they're all done gobbling by the first couple days. And over in Illinois, you guys got it right, and it's spread out. I don't hear that a lot, but I have heard it, I swear. But yeah, we're interested to see if that season's the season segments will impact gobbling at all, and we hope to have a citizen science element to it, where we're getting these ARUs put out on private land and cover the whole state north to south.
That would be cool.
And so we're hoping to get a lot of unhunted land as well as hunted land. So that should really help us out too. And in Illinois, we've really only done the vast majority of turkey research has been done in the southern half of the state, virtually all of it really, and most of that in the southern tip. So to get some research done in eastern Illinois, in the corn desert, and northern Illinois, where is a lot like the upper Midwest, where populations seem to be really going off the rails, will be really valuable. So.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that'll be a super cool project. I definitely want to stay tuned for that.
Yeah. Dr. Brent Peace will be the PI on that, and he's out of Southern Illinois University, Carbondale.
Yeah, I know him. Very cool.
Yeah, and we've got a project that we're wrapping up. It's been going on for a number of years, and had a few different grad students come through it. One of them, like I mentioned, Morgan, she studied the black flies, and we also had another PhD student, Dr. Christine Parker, and she looked at a number of different aspects. She's got a paper out, Pyrodiversity Matters. So it was a pretty cool.
I've read it.
Yeah, and so I love that one because, you know, it kind of illustrates what we already know, that turkeys rely on burned habitat. They prefer areas that have had fire, and and what we already know, they prefer diversity in those burns. And so a lot of times managers are thinking of diversity in terms of season and size of the burns. But what this paper illustrates is you also need to think about the temporal diversity as well. So years since burn, and so it's really neat to look into. You know, turkeys are using, during one part of their life phase, they're using an area that was burned last year. In another part of their reproductive phase, they're using areas with at least 2 years, if not more, since the burn. And then an important thing that came out, I think, in her paper is that they really rely on areas that have no recent fire history at all. You know, almost in her study, virtually no nests were made in burned areas. So hens were preferentially selecting areas with little or no fire history to put their nests down. So that was another that was a cool part of that paper that I think is interesting. She's got a paper in edits right now that talks about incubation patterns of hens, and so she's in her research found that hens are exhibiting partial incubation leading up to the day at which they sit on the nest 24 hours a day. And so that's happening at between 1 and 6 days before that around the clock sit. They're coming in and sitting, and the amount of time they're spending on the nest is increasing as you get closer to that day. So
That sounds really similar to. I don't know if you've ever read any of the historical literature from Lovett Williams, but he described a pattern like that, which he didn't talk about it from the perspective of incubation, but he did talk about the hen progressively spending more time, especially at day 5 or 6.
Yep.
He started seeing the increase in the time spent at the nest at day or 5 or 6, I think is what he said. And then by the time you get to incubation, she was spending a lot of time there. So that's interesting if it seems to be linked to incubation.
Yeah, it's
that starting to incubate, I guess.
Right. And then we've got a grad student right now. She's just starting her master's project, and she's looking at archival data from this project and trying to figure out how much prospecting hens have been doing for nests. And so right now it's pretty raw data, but if you average all the hens out, they just gradually get closer and closer to the nest site as you get closer to the incubation, but it's very individualized. And so some of these hens are spending all their time very far away from the nest, and then one day decide to spend all their time around the nest site. And then some, go back and forth between being very far away from the nest and spending a lot of time around the future nest site and everything. So that research is kind of in its beginning, but it's going to be pretty interesting to see the individual behaviors of all these hens over the time. So.
And are you guys partnering with Southern Illinois on the work?
Yeah, I should have mentioned that project is through the Illinois Natural History Survey at the University of Illinois, and Dr. Jeff Hoover is the PI on those projects. And
I think you did mention that earlier.
Yeah, I didn't kind of talk about who was doing what, but yeah, he's been the PI on that project for several years, and we're going to be entering into our final trapping season this winter and wrapping that project up. So
yeah, very cool.
Nice. We'll have to have you back on once everything's wrapped up and see what came of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, happy to do it. Yeah, I'm sure Brent would like to join too. So
yeah, I think I've met Brent a couple of times. I know I've co-authored a paper with him at some point or another.
Yeah, but, so he was co-author on a project with Chris Cray out in North Carolina doing some gobbling chronology stuff several years ago. So yeah, I'm eager to apply it to Illinois. To my knowledge, it's not something that's been studied much in the Midwest at all. So
yeah, that'll be really interesting.
Yeah.
I should also Illinois is also participating in a project looking at neonics, neonicotinoids, us and a number of other Midwestern states, and that project's going to be ran by Texas A&M, and I'm not positive right now. It's early in the phase there. I'm not positive right now how much involvement I will have in particular, but we'll be participating in it. So I'm eager to look into that. See how much these treated seeds are impacting any reproduction or behavior, anything like that with turkeys. They're definitely prevalent.
I know when we brought it up on the air, all of a sudden I started getting images of turkey crops.
Right. Yeah, I get those a lot.
Treated seeds. Yeah.
Gosh, it makes you wonder. Should we even be eating these birds, let alone the birds eating the seeds?
Yeah, probably not good. Actually, I remember I did a social media post on a paper that had screened it in. I don't remember where it was now. I think it was in Manitoba or something. It was I can't remember, but they showed that the levels of toxicity in some individuals were exceeding what was found in other game birds to be lethal.
Wow.
Which obviously that's a red flag. We probably ought to look at it.
And I've got a handful of neonic data sitting on my desk too. We weren't able to test a lot of birds, but we took a first shot at it and just haven't had a chance to go through that yet. But I think it's definitely on everybody's radar. Do you know who y'all are collaborating with at Texas A&M on that?
Dr. Hammer, Hamer.
Okay.
I haven't met her yet, but I've emailed with her a little bit.
Yeah.
So, and then Brett
I know
Collier.
her as well.
Brett Collier is also involved. So.
Okay.
And hopefully, I'm not speaking out of turn on that because we haven't even had preliminary meetings on that one yet. But I do know we've gotten approval for funding and everything. So that was funded by the NWTF.
Yeah. Well, that'll be exciting and good information to have.
Yeah, for sure.
That's all I got, Marcus. What you got?
Yeah. Well, I was gonna ask you, Luke. Is there anything that we should have asked you or that you want to talk about?
I definitely wanted to give our previous researchers some credit for all the good work we've done or that they've done. So
yeah, and all the papers that you have mentioned, we'll link those in the show notes.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yep. I'm happy to provide all the links I can and everything. No, beyond that, I appreciate the time, appreciate the opportunity to come on here and and tell folks that Illinois does have a slightly complicated spring season, but there is a method to our madness, and it's potentially preserving the quality of the hunt and maybe even preventing further declines in the population, but those questions remain unanswered. So.
But it sounds like y'all are definitely doing your due diligence in terms of, figuring out, what's working and what's not working going forward with some of that research that you've implemented.
Yeah, and that's, we definitely hear from folks all the time saying, things are too complicated, just cut us loose and let us go hunting. And that's a lot of the reason for having that project. I don't want to, just because I may have justification for our season structure doesn't mean it's boilerplate or set in stone. We're always looking for opportunities to improve and ways to improve hunter access as well as conserve the natural resource. So,
yeah. Luke, you also, when you were talking earlier about the turkey survey, is that something that's available to the public?
Yeah.
And is it something we can link here?
Yeah, I should have mentioned a little more about that. So we historically did a wild turkey survey. We called it the brood survey, and we would mail out postcards statewide is the old methodology. And the old method would ask for folks, it would say brood number 1, brood number 2, and then on the bottom, almost like an afterthought, it would ask you to list the hens you saw without broods or just to number them. And so I think that was negative or positively biasing the pulse per hen. We were only hearing from folks who saw hens that actually had broods. And so I think, I know we had the big dip in 2019 where we saw pulse per hen dramatically decrease. And I do think that it was a real, something that was really happening on the landscape. But it was also the year that I changed the format of the postcard to emphasize that we wanted to hear, or I guess clarify, that we wanted to know about, not only all hens with or without poults, but also male birds and everything. We were trying to come up with methodology that allow us to share those data across state lines. And that was when, multiple states started doing the same thing. But yes, that brood survey, we have now switched it to an online thing using Survey 123 as the format, and so it's all electronic and pretty easy. You can use it on your phone, use it on the website, and we leave it open year round. So I'm happy to get observations from folks. Just literally every turkey you see, you can go in there and record it. You have the option of clicking a map to show exactly where you were, or you can just filter down and show your county. We leave it up year round, like I said, but we filter it for our state for June, July, and August. And then when we share those data across state lines, they just look at July and August. But we're happy to take observations of wild turkeys year round. And yeah, like you mentioned, put the link in the show notes and folks can get on there and bookmark that page. And you can even download the Survey 123 app, and that allows you to submit observations when you don't have service. So it's
great.
Pretty slick deal. We still have folks who are hesitant to make the big jump to the electronic format. And so if you absolutely request it, I can still mail postcards. There's still a few dozen folks that I mail postcards to, and I manually enter the data, and I'm happy to do it just to get those data. So.
Yeah.
I'm guessing those people don't listen to our show.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Yeah, let me know, because I have an email address set aside just for wild turkey survey stuff. So, yeah. I'd love to know that.
Yeah.
Well, we've said it before, but, for states that have surveys like they do in Illinois, that's a really easy way for hunters to get back to turkeys. It doesn't cost you anything other than a few seconds of your time when you see a turkey, see a brood.
Yeah, we try to do our best to remind folks, the first year we switched to the electronic format, we saw participation decline by almost 2/3. We still had pretty good sample size, but it was not even close to what it was with the old postcards. And, but there's so much manpower involved with stuffing envelopes and entering manual data. And so it's a real no-brainer to make the switch to electronic. And so this year we really got that word out as best we could through social media and email and everything. And we're back up to at or above the levels we were in the old postcard era. So good to see.
Yeah. Very good. All right, Luke. Well, we really appreciate having you. It was fun talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I learned a lot. I didn't know much about your state.
Yeah.
So,
me too. And you stimulated some thoughts, that I hadn't had before about. Yeah. Well, that's not hard to do. But
I hope I just didn't dumbfound you.
Some research ideas,
Yeah.
Yep.
So basically, you just said something, Luke, is what we'll say.
There you go.
No, it really was fun, and it did challenge me several times. I wasn't expecting you to get on the black fly thing or tell us that coyotes are good.
And I'm not endorsing that. Don't put that quote. Luke Garver says coyotes are good, but you can't argue with the data. It's there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We'll share that with folks as well.
You didn't even mention cicadas don't help, Marcus.
Cicadas don't help.
Right.
Luke is just here. Good. Luke is just here to poke holes in everything that we've said so far.
Hey, this is an open forum. If there's data to support something, then we're going to talk about it.
That's right. Well, cool. Thanks for coming on, Luke.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks everybody out there for listening. We appreciate it.
Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.